I would say one of the number one things that I see with my clients that is a problem is the communication they have with the adult child that they still have contact with. They're trying to solve their problems. They're trying to give unsolicited advice, but just navigating all of those types of things and being a good listener, that is one thing that I have seen solve so many relationship issues is when the mom goes first and says, I want to hear you. And then she's quiet. There was almost full estrangement when she was on the street because I didn't know where she was. So I know moms, that's one of the scariest parts is when you don't know if your child's dead or alive. But what I realized during that process is A, I was enabling, and B, I was being manipulated.
Hey, welcome to the Why Intervention Podcast. I am your host, Christopher Doyle, today joined by Sally Harris. Sally helps mothers navigate one of life's most challenging journeys, estrangement from their children. After over a decade battling addiction, depression, and the despair of suicide attempts, it was a severe health crisis that ultimately sparked Sally's profound transformation. Through deepening faith and a revolutionary insight that her well-being couldn't depend on her daughter's choices, Sally found her way to healing. She celebrates years of sobriety, a renewed relationship with her daughter, and a thriving coaching practice that helps other mothers find their path to wholeness. Sally, thank you so much for coming on. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So let's just start with the idea of estrangement. I'd just like to get your definition of what that entails, or maybe we're talking about it on a spectrum, what the involvement might be. Are they in the picture? Are they not in the picture? When does it become estrangement officially from your perspective?
Right. That's a great question. That's a question that a lot of people have. In my opinion, estrangement is any time you have a fractured relationship where contact might be decreasing or the relationship is just not on the same level maybe it was. There can be full estrangement, of course, where there's no contact. I see some of that, but also on the other side of things where, like I said, decreased contact. A lot of times we will get adult children who want to take a pause. They will want to walk away from mom, dad, maybe even the whole family for a period of time. And many times what that is a child trying to figure out their own way. They're trying to navigate what they're looking for in their own life. Maybe most times than not, they're struggling with something themselves that mom may or may not know about. And so they're wanting to separate themselves from the family for a bit. Either way, it's a hardship for sure. And, one thing along the lines of what is estrangement, one thing that I want viewers to understand is that I fully believe that even though a child is, let's say they walk away, they are in pain as well. Many times we think that our kids they don't love us anymore, they hate us, all of that. And is there certain family dynamics where maybe there was some abuse or something like that where, yes, they walk away and I don't know what those kids are thinking. But the moms that I serve and my family, it had less to do with me and more to do with, struggles that our kids have. And so those kids are hurting too. Ideally, they would love a healthy relationship. And that's where estrangement can be worked on. And the first step of that is really just taking a look in the mirror and figuring out, what can I control? And that's only me.
Mm-hmm. And
they can control themselves. And so that's how I identify it, is both ways, whether there's no contact or limited contact.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be pretty obvious to say that estrangement with no contact is obvious, but with limited contact, judging how your child may, if they're in that kind of period where they want to, that they're taking a break or they're walking away because they're dealing with something they don't feel comfortable discussing with you. Mm-hmm. So how do you then approach that as a parent?
Yeah. So, right. And I hear this every day. The very first step when I start working with a mom, the very first step is, what is your support system? Because this is by far, in my opinion, or at least what I've experienced, the most difficult time in someone's life is to have your family fractured or to have your adult child walk away for whatever reason. And many moms are trying to navigate it alone, which I was guilty of that for a long time. And that is number one. Who's your support system? I'm obviously a support system for my clients, as well as I have a group coaching where you end up having a family of other women who are going through the same thing that can identify and empathize with you. But then I need to know who on the outside in your real life, who are those people? And if they don't have someone, I help them find those people.
Okay.
Because we cannot go through this alone. And I'm not the end all be all forever, right? They need to be able to navigate these waters in real life too.
Right. So what percentage of your clients come to you and they have no support system when they're starting?
Probably about 60%.
Yeah. Okay. So better than half. Yeah. So support system is important. So now let's say they get their support system in place or they do have one. What is the approach that they're taking to try and reconnect or establish lines of communication?
Well, to me, using the support system, and that could just mean one, maybe two people. Could be a good friend. It may or may not be a spouse. I always say the people that are closest to us are probably not going to be the people that get us through this ordeal. Why? Because they're too emotionally charged. They're too emotionally involved in it. So having someone on the outside who is a safe person to talk to about it. And I know firsthand, it almost destroyed my marriage. And it also almost destroyed some friendships because I was so hyper-focused on the problem that anytime I got in front of someone, that was the topic of conversation. And after a while, after several years, people are like, I don't know what to say to her anymore.
Right.
And it's not that they don't love you or they didn't love me, but we can't expect them to completely understand unless they've gone through it.
Right. And it doesn't make much sense to have support coming from people who are just doing their best to figure it out on the fly also, right? They're uncertain what is the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. And so everyone's just trying to figure it out as they go. And if that's who you're leaning on, that's not the most effective approach.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I believe that goes for anything in life. If you're going through a divorce or you have a death of a parent, until someone, not that someone can't be there for you, but you can't expect them to be able to empathize and truly come together with you and be able to help you solve a problem.
Yeah. So it's almost, we want to clarify between, say, support and guidance. You can have a support system that isn't necessarily in tune with what the problem is, but you need specific guidance on how to navigate a specific problem.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's where, like I said, that first phase of when I work with someone, it is, like I said, the support system to get those people in place who are the people you could call 24/7. And sometimes people will say, oh, I've got that one friend. She would totally be there for me. And that's awesome. We need to know that we're not alone because this is devastation like no other when your child has walked away. And whether it's addiction, mental health, spiritual issues, differing opinions where we can't agree to disagree kind of a thing, or abundance of other things, other reasons too. But regardless of the reason, the goal should be to eventually is to reconcile. Obviously, that's what most people want. That's what the moms want. And most of the children I've even talked to, it's truly what they want. They're just trying to navigate these waters. And so that's where the self-care piece, like you said, there's the guidance. And then, like I mentioned earlier, being able to look in the mirror. What do I need to change? And the moms that are not willing to do that at all, I don't know, those relationships don't typically change because you and I can only change ourselves. Your son or daughter can only change themselves. And so as a mom, I feel that it's our responsibility, not only just for that relationship, but for our own health, because I didn't do that. I did everything the other direction. I turned to alcohol. I had gained 70 pounds. I was extremely unhealthy. And as you mentioned in the intro, I dealt with suicide attempts during this time. It was just a really dark time.
So what was the beginning of the estrangement for you with your daughter? If we go back in time to how old was she when, and what happened to lead to this initial estrangement?
Yeah. Well, in the 10 years that we dealt with estrangement, it was ebb and flow. She was 14 when
Okay.
it started. But, like I mentioned, estrangement, there were periods at the end where there was no contact. And then there were periods in the beginning and middle where there was. Obviously, she was 14. We had sent her to a boarding school to graduate high school because she was leaning towards not graduating, but also was getting involved with some drugs and really a bad crowd, was just going down the wrong path. And that went on for a while. And of course, we did counseling. We did everything every mom tries to do.
Yeah.
And so we ended up choosing, she did go do that, came back home after a year. We were very involved. I was flying out there all the time and came back. And then we actually did an intervention. And it wasn't so much that she was a drug addict. Did she use? Yeah. But thank God she was never really addicted. But it was more behavioral tendencies. And I learned a lot from the intervention process. That is for sure. I'm sure some of your...
Yeah. How old was she when you did that?
17 and a half.
Okay. And so how did it go? You said you learned a lot. What were the takeaways of that?
We had a gentleman, we were living in Wisconsin at the time. He was a company out of Chicago, and he flew up a lady who took over the process. And, they train you for a good day and a half or so before we ever bring her into the home. It was just it reminded you of the show. If anybody's watched what was that show called? I think it's just called Intervention, right?
Yeah.
But just a lot of the concepts of, okay, you're going to sit here and you're going to sit here and you're going to write a letter and you're going to read this first. And whoever might be a thorn to her is going to sit to the side. So it's not eye contact. It was just so many dynamics that were really it was just weird when you're in it.
Right.
Because it was just taking all that in. But what I realized during that process is A, I was enabling, and B, I was being manipulated.
Those are some pretty big, realizations to have. So you were being manipulated, you were enabling, and you were being manipulated. So how were you enabling? And this is now 3.5 years into the beginning of feeling this estrangement. So again, going back to that definition with the ebbs and the flows, and she's here, she's not, she's in boarding school. So we're almost kind of, at least from my perspective, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like estrangement in a sense here just means that you're not connecting, that the communication is not, back and forth. It's not open. You don't have the relationship that you would like to have. And there's a distance, whether it's actual distance or even when she's home, it's just, it feels distant.
Absolutely. So, I was one thing I learned from the interventionalist was, and this may seem minor, but maybe not to some people, if they're really, truly enabling. For me, it was like, okay, she said no, she didn't want to go to the rehab that was offered to her. And so the girl had said, well, you need to cut her cell phone off. And I was like, no way. How can I cut her cell phone off? I'm not going to have any contact. And she said, she's making a choice. You have to follow through with what you said. And, you allow them to have however much time to go down and gather whatever things that they want out of their room, and, help her do that or whatever she wants, which I did. It was devastating. I'll never forget the day she walked down the street and had to turn the cell service off, which I did. And interestingly enough, it was within minutes. There was apparently apps that you can text. You don't even need cell service. So she was already in communication with some other family members before she even probably left the house. So they're very resourceful. And I know that is a very scary thought. And I have moms that I serve too that are just, I can't let that cell service go. And you have to be ready for that. Now, granted, I went through the whole intervention process, so that was a little bit different. But a lot of moms that I serve do find that they are enabling in many, probably bigger ways than what I did, as far as financially, et cetera. So for me, it was just more allowing the behavior, allowing the manipulation, et cetera. Kids are going to manipulate to get what they want. Some of it seems normal as a teen because, well, we're not perfect. We all probably did that to our parents at some point, but this was just getting a little bit more extreme. But
in what ways?
Yeah. So
what were the extreme manipulations? So if the enabling on your part was the cell phone and cutting off the service there, what was the extreme manipulation, even if there's one specific. Okay.
Lies and hanging, mentioned hanging out with the wrong crowd,
Yeah.
Stealing the car and crashing it up and, just things like that. And finding out lies.
Such as?
When you find out that your daughter's not acting like who you thought she was. I think all parents go through that, where you're just trying to realize. But then there's just the, manipulation, like I said, is some of it's across the board. Some of it is, I'm talking about my daughter was a teenager. Some of the moms that I serve, these kids are anywhere from 8, because I work with moms with adult children. So we're talking 18. I think the oldest adult child that I refer to, probably 55. So it's definitely across the board. When they're younger, you tend to realize and you think, okay, well, some kids have a hard time getting launched or getting started, and some of it may seem quote unquote normal. We can still have hiccups. We can still have these things, but there are also a lot of signs too, where there's entitlement, where I see that a lot too. The entitlement of, you owe this to me because I'm your kid, or, mom and dad pay for college and the kid's in college, but they're, maybe they're using, they have an addiction, whether it's hidden or not. And the disrespect to the parents is what I see a lot of that. And the mom trying to navigate that relationship when your kid's off in college or living in a different state, like you said, whether it's near or far, but you're feeling that real disconnect.
Right.
Moms need support in that, and dads too. I work with just the moms because that's my personal experience. And so that's why I do that. But
yeah. So just to close the loop, when you did the intervention, she's walking down the street, and did she end up going to the rehab, or what happened next?
Yeah, she did actually. 2 weeks later, she was.
That's why intervention. Just putting the plug in, just so everybody here listening, right? Even though she said no, there she goes walking down the street. You follow the directions, and off she went to rehab. But anyway, go ahead.
Yep. 2 weeks later, about 2 weeks later, I think it was New Year's Eve, actually, I got a phone call, and she said, I'm ready. So, of course, I panicked, and I called the guy. He's like, calm down.
Yeah.
And so he said, get your husband, get her in the car, and just start driving. Then you can book the ticket. So they did that. They just started driving towards the airport. And she did go to a private rehab out in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And I think it was a 3-month. I think it was 3 months. Sometimes I think, she learned a lot, but depending on, you learned good strategies and bad strategies. Depends who you're going to hang out with and the capacity and the mental space of other people who you're around, right? Some people go to those places to knock it out of the park and change their world. And others, I think she just wanted out of her current situation. She didn't really want to go to rehab.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Like, just get there. We're good.
Yeah. And you're certainly not going to be in control of what happens when she's there. What you're hoping happens is that she's going to have the kind of epiphany that she needs. That doesn't always happen. And that's why the ongoing support and guidance and strategy in how you're going to approach dealing with things when she leaves is so important for everyone. And to know that ahead of time, that just getting into rehab is not the quick fix that everybody assumes that it is, or is hoping that it is, at least.
Right.
So after she left, then what winds up happening? When did it get to the point where the estrangement was, or did it get to the point where there was no contact?
Yeah. When she got back from rehab, she took off again. So again, she was like not quite 18. Just long story short, she took off again, and this time went to a larger city nearby, and again was with the wrong crowd, and she ended up being trafficked. And there was just a lot of things that happened there. But then fast forward, my daughter ended up in prison. And so there was almost full estrangement when she was on the street because I didn't know where she was. So I know moms, that's one of the scariest parts, is when you don't know if your child's dead or alive. So that's kind of what we navigated there for a good number of years. And then, like I said, she was in and out of jail, et cetera. But prison saved her life. And now she's been out for several years now, and she's thriving and doing great. And she chose to change her life. When
she talks about that time period now, because now she's doing well and she's, healthy and taking care of herself, how does she describe what was going on in her head when, in those years, in those late teen years, in the early 20s, why she wasn't communicating with you?
I mean, there's a lot of things, but I would say she was navigating her own pains that she needed to work through. And she just wanted to, I mean, there's a lot of traumatic things and just navigating all of it. And sometimes, and then when we numb it, like I did, I mean, I numbed my own pain. I wasn't using drugs, but alcohol, it's a drug, but I wasn't using street drugs. But just trying to navigate just internal pain. And when we tried to get her help when she was younger, she wasn't ready. So, which is typical for kids that age. They just go from therapist to therapist because they didn't like that one or they didn't like this one. But at the end of the day, she, God changed her life completely when she was released, and she's just been thriving ever since.
Okay. So for a lot of, our listeners, it's the, family members. And of course, that's hopeful to hear, right? And it doesn't sound like it's not an ideal path, right? And that's why there's always hope if you're holding out, like you always want to be hopeful that these things can happen. You don't want to get to the place where you've given up 100% because, what I've seen is regardless of the distance, it's almost like that is a felt experience for your child also. I don't, wherever they are, they can sense I've been given up on. You never want to give up entirely. That wasn't a traditional trajectory. That's not what you would hope for. But for the parents who are listening now, why don't we talk about just your struggles during that time then? You mentioned drinking, you mentioned, being overweight and all of that. So let's talk about where you were at as these things were going on and how you got through that.
Like I said, all the things that I teach my moms now, I did the polar opposite.
Right.
Like,
So here's a what not to do session.
Right.
Here's what not to do.
We have to be able to find joy. And I know it's hard and it takes time and it's a process, but we have to be able to find the positives and the joy in life as well, simultaneously while you're hurting. Because if we don't have gratitude, we don't have any joy. The biggest thing about numbing my pain that I learned was that I was numbing the pain, but I was numbing the joy too. So I could see nothing good in anything. And I had 2 other children and a granddaughter. And so, I had a lot of things to be grateful for. But I was seeing, there were times where I felt like I wasn't seeing anything because I was so hyper-focused. And I think that's because our identity for a mom is so wrapped up in being a mom. And that's our self-identity doesn't even exist because it's all about being a mom. And then something like this happens where you lose contact or something happens, you have an argument and, it ends up being this catastrophic event, or they end up in addiction or whatnot. All of these things. And like you said, the hope, that's what I do. I help moms overcome hopelessness. Like literally that's what I do because I refuse to allow any of them to give up hope. I have enough hope for all of them because I know it's possible.
Right.
I know how my life was changed. I know how my daughter's life was radically changed. And so that, the not to do list is, not taking care of yourself, ignoring that you need a support system, all of those kinds of things. And that starts with self-awareness is, figuring out, okay, well, maybe you're a mom that does have some communication. What is your communication like? There's boundaries around, and some of you are probably hearing that from your kids. Like, I want boundaries. Boundaries aren't bad. The word's gotten a really bad rap because nobody wants to hear the B word.
Right.
But it's really around how are you communicating? I would say one of the number one things that I see with my clients that is a problem is the communication they have with the adult child that they still have contact with. They're trying to solve their problems. They're trying to give unsolicited advice. They're wanting to be such a huge part of their world where maybe the kid is saying, okay, I'm married, I have my own child. I love you, Mom, but I just need some space to breathe. Maybe for some reason mom is like that. I've seen that many times. Or just trying to be in control. And especially for the parents who are grandparents also. Once your child starts having kids, you're going to have differing opinions.
Yeah.
But that's their child. So unless advice is asked, we really do have to learn to step back. And it's really easy for me to say these things and people think, how in the world do I do that? Because I've done this my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
But just navigating all of those types of things and being a good listener, that is one thing that I have seen solve so many relationship issues is when the mom goes first and says, I want to hear you. And then she's quiet.
Yeah.
And she's listening.
I feel like one of the challenges, I have it too, because I have my personal story as well, right? In being in alcohol and cocaine addiction at various different stages, that I'm just curious about this idea that's coming to mind right now. How do you, for what you just said, that moms would then compare, maybe they'd say, yeah, but not just you. But so in a general way, right? The question is, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that I should do this, but here's what you did, right? Like, so I went down, you want me to go down this path and learn from my example. You know, don't do what I did, do this instead, right? And how do we really get people to accept that, adopt that, go ahead and do that when the reality is like, it was so hard for you, right? And look what you did in response to it or in reaction to it at the time. You avoided getting a support system, like you said. You were drinking, like you said. And so then you have someone who it's like, let's do this, you know, like, and it's just like, what are you talking? Like, I'm in it. I'm in it. And so finding joy right now, like you're out of it. Good for you. You're out. I'm in. So how do you handle that kind of, you know, sentiment?
I love that. That reminds me of, I have a group coaching program. And it has, these women are like family to me. And we meet twice a week. And this is the kind of stuff. It's like the new mom will come in. They just welcome her with open arms. And, you know, I lead the sessions and I meet everybody where they're at. A lot of moms will say, you know what? One mom said, this is the best group you never wanted to be in, right? Because who wants to be in an estrangement group, right? But at the end of the day, they're making friends. They're feeling not alone. And as far as, you know, the struggles that we've had in life, all of us, even from the past, that's what made us stronger. I can sit here and say all the things I say and teach because I've been there and I overcame it. If I was still in it, who would I be to speak about it? Or be even as long as I was making progress, like that's great. But it's just like anything else in life. You know, I believe that those challenges and those trials make us stronger and give us character, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that support system really feeling like you're heard and I'm not alone. I have some moms who are telling absolutely nobody other than their husband, nobody knows because they're embarrassed. And so they can come to group and have a room full of other women who are, welcoming them and loving on them and just they don't even have to share if they don't want to, because that is, they do when they feel comfortable. But in the beginning, you can learn a lot from listening to people too. It's just community, any type of community, is just super important.
Sure.
That they have.
And so I know that where your heart is, and you have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion. So this question may come off a little strange, but I'm curious, what's the most frustrating thing that parents are coming to you with on a repeated basis where you're just like, oh my God, this again, here we go. What's the thing that you're dealing with most often where you're just like, okay, we got to do something about this right away?
Well, one off the top of my head would be enabling, like massive enabling. So, a lot of kids, not labeling our kids or anything like that for sure, because I'm definitely not about labels, but our kids get entitled, especially in wealthier families. And even if they're not, and these moms, some of them are, broke their back, working 2 jobs, but their kid had everything. They had to work for nothing. And then these kids grow up and that's a learned behavior for the kid too.
Cool.
I don't know. This is the way life's always been.
Yeah.
You mean it's going to change? And then the kid gets mad and either walks away or threatens to walk away because you didn't give me what you've always given me. And so if I could turn back time, and someday I do want to do prevention as well. So they don't need me when we get here.
Right. Right.
But the prevention piece to moms who have younger kids is navigate that, be really mindful. I mean, I'm a true believer that we need to work for what we have. It doesn't mean there's a difference between helping and enabling. 100%. Of course, we would help our kids. But at the same time, I never wanted my kids to be entitled. And that's one thing I don't think my kids ever dealt with that, because they worked for everything.
Mm-hmm.
They worked for everything. But the struggle is really difficult for the mom, because then she's stuck. Now what? How do I break this off? And it doesn't have to be a hard break. It could be, okay, starting on this date, Dad and I really want you need to start paying for your own cell phone bill, or you need to start paying your car insurance, or, something like that. It can be a slow fade there. It doesn't have to be like, oh, April 1, you're done. But if there's addiction, in my opinion, giving them money is the worst thing we could do.
Yeah. And with addiction, and you have experience with it, typically a hard stop works if you communicate why that hard stop is coming and what we'd like you to do instead, so that you can avoid the harshness of this hard stop. So here's an opportunity. Right. Here's something that's better than what you're doing now. And if you refuse to accept it, then okay, well then we're going to have to turn off your cell phone service, because every dollar we give you can be converted into your ongoing substance use. We can't be party to that. We can't accept that. We're, putting you on notice. So if you refuse today, then no more cell phone. And when you present it in that way, it's, like, oh, okay. It's hard to argue. It becomes, there's no ambiguity in what you've just communicated. And then they know exactly why their cell phone just got shut off.
Right.
And then every other time that they're going to need money in the future, if you communicate, I'm not giving you any money anymore, they're going to come back and say, Mom, I really need $100. I say, oh, no, honey, I already explained to you where we stand on that. So we're not going to be giving any money anymore, but I'm happy you called. And if you want to get into the program that we mentioned, we can do that. That's why I was really hoping that, when I picked up the phone, I saw you, and I was really hoping that's why you were calling.
Right. Yeah. The ideal phone call in that scenario, for sure.
Yeah. So the difference between helping and enabling, I think, is a great concept that not many people understand. And I think that a lot of parents, especially families, but parents and moms, probably moms more than anyone else, are getting judgment from others. There's almost a stigma against wanting to help your child when they're in these types of situations in their life, especially if there's addiction involved, right? But if it's addiction, or if it's disrespect, if it's, them doing things where it's like, how can you let them talk to you like that? Or how can you let them treat you that way? That kind of thing. And it's like, people will look at you as if you're wrong for wanting to help your child, right? Because help is getting linked with the idea of enabling. That help is almost directly correlated in people's minds to enabling. So it's like, why are you helping her? What are you doing? Why are you helping her? Right? But help is different than enabling. So if we're being, just forthcoming, enabling can enable addiction to continue, or enable these behaviors to continue. And if you're not consciously aware of that, sure, we have to begin to shift those enabling behaviors, because you identify that they directly contribute to the ongoing substance use or the ongoing behavior. Okay, great. But the intention that you have to want to help your child is as natural and wholly appropriate as you can imagine. So the judgment piece, it's like, how do you get through the almost stigma against that, and the feelings that moms can have about feeling judged for wanting to help their child?
Yeah. Everyone has an opinion, right?
Yeah.
And that's why your support system, the people that you are talking to about the situation, is going to be small, and it's going to be very intentional. Exactly that reason. I always give an analogy of, if you picture yourself on a front porch and the people on your front porch are your people. These are the safe people. These are the people I could call anytime who are going to be able to empathize with me. I feel safe. Everybody else in your world could be some friends, coworkers, colleagues, whoever, neighbors. They're all out in your front yard. They love you too. Like, you have a great relationship with them, but they're not your people for this. You really need to be distinct about who's on your porch and who's in your yard.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people have opinions, like you're saying. Why are you doing that? Why are you helping? Or actually, you're just enabling them. That's their opinion. They don't know all the background. I mean, we could talk for hours about each and every, family situation. It's like there's so much background. And not only do they have opinions, but then there's some that just want to gossip, right? Then there's the ones that, are going to come up to you in church or at the grocery store and say, how's Johnny doing? And I believe you have to have I always tell my moms that if they're not ready to talk or those are not the people, to have a candid answer. So you can continue moving through the store or whatever it is, because some people truly love and care and others are just gathering information.
Mm.
Those are usually the ones that are saying, why are you doing that? Because they don't understand. And you need to let that roll off, because other people's opinions are none of our business.
Yeah, that's a great quote. Other people's opinions are none of our business. So how do you help someone who really has trouble, though, letting that stuff roll off them? And, by extension, also just trouble with any of the suggestions. How do you get someone to, I know this is hard. I know this is difficult, the challenge, because you haven't done it before. This is something brand new that you're trying. So how do you get them over the hump of maybe even, like, I'm thinking about lovingly detaching that kind of idea, just from, I see that as part of the same thing, but on a smaller scale in the supermarket, it's detaching from the comments, from the comment section, right? And over here, detaching from my child is living on the street. Or are you going to separate yourself from the very real emotional impact of these things?
Well, I think it goes back to, who are you talking to? Are they safe? And it takes practice. I meet with my moms on Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day. Doesn't matter what day of the week it is, because those are the two hardest days of the year. So you can sit there and everyone has, like I said, we talked about the grocery store or church or whatnot, or you have a family holiday. Then you have to walk into a room full of family members who are wondering, where's Johnny? Or when's the last time you heard from him? Why do you suppose he left? Is he still using? Or did he drop out of school? All the questions. And those are difficult. And to detach from other people's opinions, it takes work. There is no easy answer for that, because it takes inner work for you. It's yes, we can avoid those people as much as possible and avoid the conversations, but it's more about self-forgiveness, because we can forgive, we know that we're to forgive others, right? Doesn't mean what they did was okay, but holding on to resentment, it's going to not serve anybody. But what moms don't do most frequently is forgive themselves. They beat themselves up. They don't really need all those people in the grocery store. They do it themselves. I should have done this, or I should have got a divorce, or I shouldn't have got a divorce, or if I just wouldn't have talked to her that way, or even if it was one moment in time they remember, or that should have been a red flag and it wasn't, or a million things go through our head.
Mm-hmm.
But that self-forgiveness is so crucial, because how do you move forward without it? You're going to stay stuck until you do that.
Yeah. I know how I address that with parents who have children who are struggling with addiction, but I'm curious how you get your moms through that guilt. How do you get them through? I mean, self-forgiveness, you're saying like self-forgiveness is the answer, but how do you really help them come to terms with the fact that what you've done, like to forgive yourself for it? How do you really help them do it?
Well, there's the moms that would be like, if you were to make a list of what are the things that you need to forgive yourself for, make a list.
Yeah.
Are some of these things truly something that I intentionally did that I shouldn't have done? That's harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you still need to forgive yourself. most of the things that I run into are moms that are, you know what, I was a helicopter parent or I was a drill sergeant. I like controlled their life because I was mom and I was just trying to keep structure in the house and we had 5 kids and, keep some normalcy. It was most of the things that I hear, because the moms that did some of the other things aren't coming to me, right? They're not unfortunately, they're not the ones typically working on themselves.
Such as, what do you mean, the other things?
If there was any abuse or anything like that, like, intentional abuse, I don't hear from those people. The moms that are making the list of the things, like I mentioned, the helicopter parent, all that kind of stuff, those are the moms that you can make that list of things. Like for me, for example, both of my girls were in varsity golf. I made their lunches, I made their snacks, I made sure their clothes were washed, blah, blah, blah. You may think, well, you're a mom. Why wouldn't you do those things? And that's how I used to feel. And I'm not saying that's horrible if you do that for your kids, but I was so hyper-focused on that stuff, making sure everything was perfect for them. Or this is a kind of a funny example, but one of my kids had a band. She played the clarinet and she had a parade and it was like 30 minutes away. And she was on the school bus and she had one job to take her instrument. That's all she needed. And she forgot it because she was too busy doing everything else. So mom to the rescue, drove 30 minutes to take the clarinet. Now, if I could go back, and we joke about it now, but I say, I would not take your clarinet. I would let you walk in that parade without an instrument because that teaches them, and now she laughs and she's like, yeah, she's a mom over, a 12-year-old now. So she's like, I wouldn't do it either. So we just kind of laugh about it now, but it's little things like that. I guess what I'm saying is when we have teenagers, we forget to let them be responsible for themselves, at least to a great degree, maybe not 100%. We're responsible for their safety, their education, emotional health as much as possible as they'll allow us to be a part of. But a lot of us forget to drawing back the reins a little bit, giving them more responsibility. I don't know about you, but if my kids are going to fall on their face, I want them to do that while they're still under my roof.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you want to have some resilience built in, and so that they can handle challenges and things. But what about just the pushback if someone were to say, yeah, but I mean, okay, they've got the clarinet. They're going to be walking through this parade without a clarinet. I mean, they need help. So this was a mistake, right? So if someone were to say, yeah, but, like let's say that was your husband and your husband forgot his medication or something. Does what was forgotten change the approach? Or would you say, because you're going to have people be like, yeah, but that is what I would do as a human. Forget about mom and dad. It's just what I would do.
Could be. That goes back to the helping versus enabling.
Yes.
And especially like the band example, you could say that could go either way, right? Was I enabling her by driving 30 minutes one way to get her the instrument when technically she could have marched or she could have sat out? I don't know what the teacher would have done. I don't know. But it's just something now that we look back at and laugh about. But at the time I was on my way. Nobody was going to stop me. I was going to get her what she needed.
Right. So that's interesting. So we take a specific example and it's like, you don't know all of the context, which is what we were saying before, right? Every situation and circumstance is going to be different. And so, obviously for you and for everybody, if you're struggling with enabling, part of it is going to be what you are communicating ahead of time. That's really the ideal. When we're talking about boundaries aren't the challenge as much as communicating the boundaries. It's having a clear picture of what this looks like and how this is going to look moving forward, what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do. And so, if you would have had that conversation ahead of time, somehow, some way, if you would have, if she was forgetful and then you would say, here's what's going to happen in the future if ever, leave your clarinet behind, that kind of thing. And as crazy as it sounds, and I, go over this with, families all the time, as far as addiction goes, you want to have as many of these as possible. You want to have as many of these communication, like this clear communication around boundaries and things like this for the purpose of giving you an opportunity to help them with the bigger issues when they happen. You don't have all of these things in place that's when the big thing comes. And then you try to, make some big major shift, and it's not going to happen then.
Falls on deaf ears then, right?
Yeah.
Because they're like, what are you talking about?
Right. And yeah, it's really hard to go from full entitlement to, we're not doing this anymore, and you need to stop drinking or stop using drugs.
Right.
And it's like, what?
Right.
It's just too, it's like, what are you talking about? They will make you wrong for even attempting. And if you attempt it and you're not really ready to follow through, that's not good either.
No, and that's just it. Every decision has a consequence, and we don't always get to choose the consequence, right? Depending on what the decision was. But we're human. We get that free will. We can do what we want, but we have to know that there's a consequence coming.
So for you, right before things began to shift for you, so maybe if you would think about your own experience and say, well, when you were a year out from getting out of the real pain and suffering that you were in and dealing with her estrangement, what were you really beating yourself up over? What were the things on your list that you were still guilty over and therefore, drinking over and getting to a place where you were dealing with some suicidal thinking?
So I was married before, and I was divorced, and he was the father of both my girls. But my husband adopted them when they were 8 and 10. So he's been in their life a really long time, and they adore him. But one thing because I know this particular thing is on not everybody's list, but a lot of lists, is I should have got divorced. Okay. So what I've learned is I would say 80 to 90% of the families, the moms that I work with, their children in particular, have father issues. Right. And so for me, I was a single mom for 6 years before I met my husband, and I tried to be mom and dad. And I realized, while I physically was doing all the things in here, I can't replace that. And so I had to realize that I thought I could be the end all be all. And it was like, not that I regret getting divorced, because I don't, but at the end of the day, I knew that pain was there for both my kids. It's there for every child of divorce, especially if dad's not in the picture. So that is something that a lot of kids need to work through. And so, yeah, that was kind of, if you would say, on my list, because I was having to come to grips with, I'm not the end all be all. I don't have control. I can't do it all. I can't be the one savior for my kids. My daughter in particular, she needed far beyond me. Like, I'm just a piece of it. I'm mom, but I'm not the only one.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. And so I had to realize that.
Yeah. The language that sometimes I'll give parents is that this problem has now gotten to a place that's beyond our capacity for helping you. And so that is communicating that my role as mom, my role as dad has reached its point where I'm at full capacity for what I'm capable of. Right. And this is beyond the scope of what I am capable of handling on my own. What you're going through requires a higher level of care than mom can handle. And so that's why we found this great place. And then if you're able to, have, and here's another, and you were able to present a couple of different options and try and collaborate on which of these do you think would be the best for you? This is why we thought this would work. And so now you're talking about how we're going to help you handle this problem, this challenge that you're having. We're not responsible for actually solving it for you. We're just looking to connect you with the helpful resource. Mm-hmm. But we are communicating, we are stepping out of the solving this problem game. We're done. So here's what we're willing to do to help from now on. And until you accept this help, there's really nothing for us to do.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah.
But necessary.
So what do you think makes that so hard as a mom?
Probably for most moms, the lack of the control that we thought we had. We're fixers.
The lack of control we thought we had.
Exactly.
Exactly. What's the issue there?
It's usually, in that context, it's us moms trying to navigate and fix all of the problems, taking the clarinet, fixing every single problem, taking their coat, taking their lunch, taking everything. It's like, you know what? If you let them just forget their lunch one day, they're not going to forget it again. My mom and dad wouldn't have brought my lunch, and that's okay. But yeah, you're right. It's the perceived control that many moms feel that we have. And I mean, I was the same way. And I would say majority of my clients start out that way. And I understand it. I totally understand it, because we nurture, we take care of, we keep these children alive, right? And then all of a sudden we're supposed to be hands off. It's like, wait, what? I have fixed every other problem you've had up until this point, and now I can't fix this. That's hard.
So it's like kind of grieving the kind of relationship that you once had when they were. It is an interesting thing, because I will oftentimes be speaking with parents who are, navigating, say, someone in their 20s, and I'll ask them, and it's not all the time, but sometimes I'll go, hey, when you're talking to them or you're thinking about them, how old are they in your head? And they suddenly realize that they're talking to a 13-year-old, right? And their son is 23. And so that's, you're going to run into issues when you have a 23-year-old that you are communicating with like he's 13.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And navigating that adult or the child parent relationship to, okay, now you're an adult. It's an adult relationship, like you're just saying. It's two different things. And that goes through, how old are you picturing them, but also what are your words? How are you communicating? Are you trying to control their whole situation, or giving the unsolicited advice? Some kids want the advice, and that's cool if they ask for it. But our job is to empower them to know that they can fly on their own. We get to sit back and be cheerleaders now. Like, this is our job. Like, we get to support them. We get to help them, but I'm not going to enable, and I'm not going to give advice when it's not wanted. And I still do this with all of my kids to this day, even the ones I've never had any problems with. Like, she'll start telling me something and I'll say, wait a minute, am I supposed to just listen, or did you want advice? And that one will say, well, of course I want advice. I'm like, okay, great. But if she says no, there's times where nope, I'm just venting. Okay, cool. Because then the expectation's already there. I know that I'm just listening, or I know that she wants me to answer. And I'm good with either. Yeah,
I'm reminded of like my relationship with my father was, he's passed away now, but when I was younger, I just feel like one of the things that he did really great was, even when I'm 5, 6 years old, I remember just sitting with him, and we'd go to the pizzeria after he'd pick me up from school. And I just remember him listening, he was just listening and asking questions. He didn't really give me many directions unless it was like, something actually critical looking back on, like self-defense or something. Like, he saw me get tackled from behind, but he was like, you didn't even see that kid coming. We got to get you in karate, I think. Like that kind of but otherwise it was really just him listening. And so it's funny that I bring that up, because what I would say to parents who are stuck feeling guilty for whatever it is that you feel that you've done, right? And that has somehow contributed to whatever behavior. And if we're talking about addiction, then we're talking about powerless compulsion that your child is, under, right? They're dealing with something that is beyond their control. And so when they're in active addiction and you are feeling guilty and blaming yourselves, there are far more children who have experienced the same or worse from parents that are not addicted to alcohol or to heroin or to cocaine or whatever it is that your child is doing right now. It has simply to do with that particular child and their makeup. It's like you wouldn't blame yourself if your kid had a peanut allergy. And so nothing of what you did or didn't do has anything to do with their peanut allergy or that they got diagnosed with some, illness or anything, right? You wouldn't take personal responsibility or accountability for that. You would just accept that that's something that your kid has.
Right.
And so behaviorally or mental health wise or addiction wise, that is something that your kid has. It's not because of anything that you did or didn't do. The only thing that then you're in control of, as you've said, is, so now what is my response going to be? How am I going to take care of myself so that I'm not inadvertently, unconsciously feeding into, pouring gasoline on that fire that's already burning, that I didn't start.
Right. Right. Knowing our part.
Yeah.
It's still a relationship. It's with your child, but it's still a relationship and it takes two people. And you're responsible for your response and how you act and how you interact, but you can't control their response or lack thereof.
Right.
So yeah, it can be challenging, obviously, but I love the work that you do. It's so important.
Thank you. And you as well. I mean, we all need all of this kind of help. I mean, that's why I always like to have overlap in various different services from all walks of life, because, lots of people that I deal with are going to be dealing with estrangement also. I'm working with clients right now where, their son hasn't spoken to them in months. And so this is what, happens. And so navigating it is something that we definitely need support and we need help with, and you need guidance. And it's not something that is best handled alone, nor is it something that you have to do alone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much is there anything that you wish that I could have asked or should have asked that, that you would like to share?
I would just encourage, all parents, but specifically moms, just to not do this alone, whether it's with me or someone else. You need community and you need to find your people, because this is by far, I'm quite sure, could be wrong, but in most cases, this is the hardest thing you've ever gone through.
Yeah.
So whether it's addiction or whether it's, mental health or just plain old disrespect and entitlement and, fill in the blank, it doesn't matter what the cause is.
Yeah.
We have to deal with the reality of what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to do that alone. So, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Where do people find you to connect with you?
Yeah, my website is sally-harris.com. And you can book a call. There's plenty of links on there for calls and all the details on there. So that'd be great.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking with the Why Intervention podcast today. Really appreciate you doing that, and talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris.
Okay.